Good. Man, we're about to hop into the message. Are you ready for the word? Come on. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Man, we say this all the time. A quiet church is a dead church. That means that we're not silent, that we can be involved in the Word of God. So if you hear something that maybe speaks to you, you can just agree with it. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be crazy, but you can just respond to what God's doing in your life. So last week, we started a series called Ready for Battle. And in this series, we're understanding that in this Christian life, we're in a battle. And over the next few weeks, we're really discovering how to prepare for this battle. And we're in Ephesians chapter 6. And in verse 11, it says, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. So we have to know this, that there is a scheme against our life by the devil. And we have the ability to put on the armor of God, or we can try to live this life apart from what God has provided for us. But there is an attack against us, and we need to put on the full armor of God. Jumping down to verse 14, it says, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place. So last week, we talked about the belt of truth, that there's an attack against truth, that culture tries to confuse us to say that we can have our truth and that they can have their truth. But there is an absolute truth in that we need to stand on the truth of God. And so we need to understand that there's an attack against truth, but we can put on the belt of truth. So this week, chronologically, we're jumping to the next piece of the armor that God has provided, which is the breastplate of righteousness. And sometimes you come into Christianity and you hear these big words. And I remember whenever I first came in 7th grade and the preacher would preach and I would walk away confused. And that's okay. You know, there's a lot that has to do with the Bible. And sometimes you're not going to understand everything at first. And one of the things that I was confused by was the word righteousness. I was like, what does that mean? And how do I do it? And so what is righteousness? Righteousness is a biblical thought or a biblical theology that tells us how to live our lives or how we're supposed to live. So righteousness, there's two aspects of it. There's the imputed righteousness, okay, and there is the practical righteousness. So the imputed righteousness is righteousness that was not earned by us. So this is a righteousness that was paid for us. This is right living that was paid for us. In Titus 3:5, it says, he saved us not because of righteous things that we had done, but because of his mercy. So this is saying that we did not earn righteousness, but it was actually given to us freely. So in righteousness, it's synonymous with the word justification. So justification and righteousness are always used together. And so justification, what it means is just as if you never sinned. So what this is saying, imputed righteousness, is us being given the perspective by God looking at us that we had never sinned. That we have been justified because of the sacrifice that he did on the cross. That we were not righteous, we were actually sinners, that we were separated from God. But because of the mercy and the goodness of God, he died on the cross, and now we are seen as righteous. That is imputed righteousness. And the second one is practical righteousness. So practical righteousness is the act of righteousness. So it's us actually stepping in righteousness, is doing the right things. So righteousness, what the definition of it is doing what is right in God's eyes. And we can't get this confused because sometimes we think what is right in our eyes will be seen as righteous. Or the culture will say, hey, this makes you feel good, so it's right to you, so you can do it and you can feel good about yourself. But I'm gonna let you know that righteousness is actually based on the standard of the Bible. It's not based on the standard of the culture. So culture will try to confuse what marriage looks like And so we need to be careful not to think, oh man, what is right to me? So I'm gonna step into this. No, it is a standard of the Bible. The Bible will say, hey, you can identify as anything. No, we have to understand that there is a standard of the Bible and that we can't just live according to how we want to live. That righteousness is actually the standard that comes from the Bible. And this is where we get the biblical worldview. And so many times in this culture, in this generation, we have the worldview of culture. So we're doing what is good for culture, but we need to adopt the worldview and the understanding of the Bible, because God isn't wanting us to live however we want to live. The Bible is wanting us to live righteously, and we are able to live righteously. In James 1:22, it says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. Do what the word of God says. Do what the truth says. Do what it says, because when we do it, we will actually step into freedom. And here's the truth. The act of righteousness is a byproduct of our connection with God. That we can actually live a righteous life when we're connected to God. We can't live righteous when we live separate from God, because we are sinners. That our natural bent is to do what the world does. But when we're in relationship and when we're in connection with God, we will have the byproduct of acting righteous. And so we are gonna learn from a man named Naaman, and in this man named Naaman, he's in the Old Testament. We find him in 2 Kings chapter 5. And Naaman, he was an enemy of God's people. The Israelites, and then Naaman and the country that he was in, they were in war, and they would battle against each other. And so there was a crazy attack against Israelites from Naaman, and Naaman would have victory, and Naaman would defeat the enemies, and Naaman had great favor on his life. And there was crazy things that he was doing. And Naaman, he had a sickness, he had a disease that was incurable. Like nothing could do. It was a disease called leprosy. And leprosy, what it was a disease that would eat away at your body, and eventually you would die. So when you're diagnosed with leprosy, the time clock on your life is limited. And so he's in this place of having a disease, and at the end, I'm gonna give a spoiler, at the end of this story, we find God miraculously healing Naaman. And so Naaman is the person that we're gonna be reading about today. So in 2 Kings 5:1, it says, now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a mighty soldier, but he had leprosy. So watch this. It said, I'm going to read this again. Now Naaman was a commander of the army. This means that he had great position. Like he was above a lot of people. Actually, in this time, this position would be second in command over the entire country. That he had so much authority and power that it was unimaginable. So he was a commander of the army. He was a great man in the sight of his master. So he was seen as great. He didn't only do great things, but he was actually seen as someone who was great. And then he had great victory. He was highly regarded. And watch this, it said he was a mighty soldier, but he had leprosy. So he had a lot of power, but he had leprosy. He had a lot of position. He was high in position, but he had leprosy. And there's a conflict when it comes to this, because he had a lot of power, but he was also really weak. He looked really strong and really mighty, but on the other side, he was decaying away and he was dying. So he looked good on the outside, but he was dying on the inside. He looked very strong on the outside, but on the inside, he was decaying away. He looked good on the outside, but suffered on the inside. And as humans, we have learned to act opposite of how we feel. This is something that all humans have learned to do, just to cope with life. Like, you don't feel like going to school, but you have to go to school so you don't get truant. You don't feel like going to work, but you got to pay the bills, so you got to go to work. And we have learned as humans to act opposite of how we feel. And my wife is a professional at this. She is incredible. There's times where we're driving in the car and our kids are being kids. They are screaming and yelling and throwing stuff at each other and throwing food at me. Literally, Malachi threw the top of his applesauce at my head yesterday. And sometimes being in the car with our family, if I can be honest, it can be really annoying. They're asking me unreasonable questions. I'm like, why are you asking me this? I don't know the answer to that. Like I don't know why we use cars to drive. I don't know how they were created, son. Like, I'm sorry. And they'll ask me questions I don't know the answer to, and they'll scream and yell. And my wife will sometimes get frustrated with them. She will talk to them and say, hey, you guys need to quiet down, or her face will get really intense and she'll start telling them, hey, stop throwing stuff at each other. And she gets really angry or really mad at the situation. And then all of a sudden, her phone rings, ring, ring, a ring, a ring. And she answers it and she's like, hey, you guys need to be quiet. Hello? Oh, hey, girl. Yeah, how's it going? Yep, okay, girl. Yeah, man, yeah, life's so good. Yep, we're just, we're hanging out as a family. Things are going okay, bye now, girl. Okay, bye now. Hey, guys, I told you to stop it. And so she has become a professional at acting opposite of how she actually feels. And this is oftentimes in humanity what we have learned to do. We will feel a certain way, but then we'll cover up how we feel by other emotions or by other accolades or by success or by the person that we date or the things that we do. And we can feel maybe a certain way, but then we can cover it up by something else. We have learned to look good on the outside while suffering internally. We have learned to look good to other people while we're in private, we're suffering. We have learned to look like we're happy and joyful and have everything together, while when we leave that situation, people have no idea what we're going through. And this man, he was a mighty warrior, but he had leprosy. He looked great on the outside. He put up a good face, a good mask, but on the inside, he was suffering. And this is what I found out about Christians, is that we will use righteousness to cover up brokenness. We will use us looking good in life, and then we will cover it up because we're actually dealing with brokenness. He was a mighty soldier, but he had leprosy. So we see people come into church all the time, and it's like, hey, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm blessed, brother. Have you ever met that guy? Like the overly Christian dude, like, I'm blessed and highly favored, sir. I'm doing fine. But then they go home and they're lonely, they're depressed. People will come into church and they'll lift up their hands, and then they'll go home and all hell is breaking loose in their house. And we will come in and we will put up the face of righteousness, but then we're struggling with brokenness. And we have to be careful because we can't cover up our brokenness with righteousness and think that that's gonna last our entire Christian life. Because if we're trying to look righteous before God deals with our brokenness, then we're gonna stay in the place of brokenness. But it is actually in the place of getting healing from our brokenness that will lead us to living a righteous life. But there's times where we try to earn and we will try to prove to everyone else that we are good, but we will be suffering on the inside. So internal healing is what actually leads to righteousness. You not covering your brokenness, but you actually receiving healing from your brokenness. that if you want to actually do acts of righteousness, it's not gonna come by you just putting on a good face. No, it's gonna become from you encountering the presence of God and by you getting the healing from what you have gone through in your life, and for you to receive the goodness and the power of God. That there's some of you who are, if you told somebody what you've gone through, nobody would even believe you. If people saw almost a glimpse into your life, people wouldn't even understand. Some of you have been attacked, abused, talked about, betrayed, stabbed in the back, left behind, and you have been broken. And you can't cover up that brokenness by looking good and looking holy and looking righteous. No, you need to get internal healing that will eventually lead to righteous living. And in 2 Kings, we find this man who had a disease on the inside. And he could have masked it up with his armor. He was a warrior. He was shiny on the outside. He was strong while he's decaying away. And in verse 2 of 2 Kings chapter 5, it says, now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of this leprosy. He would cure him of this leprosy. So he is broken right now, but there is a cure available. And I just want to stop right now. This isn't in my notes, but I want you to know that you don't have to stay in your brokenness forever, that there is a cure available, that you don't have to stay depressed and anxious and broken and fearful and lonely, that there is a cure available. And there is good news for somebody, because you walked in and felt like you were going to live this way for the rest of your life, but be it by the power of God, by the power of Jesus, you can be cured. And this man Naaman heard from this Israelite girl that there was a cure available. And here's my first thought from this scripture. Righteousness starts from the inside out, not the outside in. It's not gonna happen by us looking good on the outside and then it affecting our inside, but it's gonna happen from the inside out. The servant girl recognized that Naaman needed healing. She recognized it. She recognized he was in his home. She was serving. She recognized that he was decaying and falling apart. And she said, you need something more than armor to make you look good. You need a cure from God. You need something more than these accolades and positions. You actually need something that can heal you. And she told Naaman about this prophet. It's hard to live righteously when we haven't been cured from our brokenness. It's hard to actually step into it. It's hard to live right. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do this, but you're trying to live right and you just don't feel like you have the ability to. There's so much temptation. There's so many people doing the opposite of what's right in the Bible. And it can be hard to live right if we stay broken. And Jesus, one of his biggest things is he would always come after the Pharisees who were religious leaders. He would go to them and he would rebuke them because of the way that they were living. He would rebuke them. In Matthew 23, 25 through 26, this is Jesus speaking to the Pharisees or to religious leaders. It says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. This is what he's calling them. You hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be cleaned. So what is he saying? Stop focusing on trying to look good, but get internal healing. Hey, stop trying to make sure everything in your life is put together and where your Instagram, you're getting enough followers and you're getting enough likes and you're getting enough compliments from the people around you. Hey, stop worrying about the outside. You need to clean the inside. And he's rebuking these Pharisees because they have made their relationship and their religion about something about how they look. But it's not about how we look. It's about us receiving something on the inside. If I can be real tonight, a few years ago, I went through one of the toughest seasons of my entire life. I had a pastor that hurt me, broke my heart. I had friends that betrayed me, stabbed me in the back, talked about me, posted about me, left me. And at the end of that season, after a few years of this happening, if I can be honest, I was broken. I felt empty. I felt lonely. I would come into the house of God and I would preach a word and I would go home and I would feel empty. I would lift my hands in worship, but I felt so far from God. I felt disappointed and I felt fearful. I didn't know how I was gonna make it. And I was at the point of my life where I felt the most broken that I had ever felt in my entire life. And I was trying in that season to operate like everything was fine. I'm blessed, I'm good, I'm okay. And I wasn't stepping into the things that God had for me because I was so worried about looking okay on the outside, while on the inside, I was suffering. And we can't just focus on how we look on the outside. It is us receiving what God has for us on the inside. Internal healing leads to righteous living. And whenever Naaman heard that there was healing available, this man was now desperate to receive this healing. So what we find him doing is he runs to this prophet. He runs to a man named Elisha, and he goes to Elisha and he knocks on the door, and Elisha sends a messenger and he tells Naaman something to do. He says, hey, you need to go to the Judea River and you need to wash 7 times. You need to dip in the river 7 times. And Naaman didn't like this. He didn't like this because he had to go off and do something. And here's my second point. I'm ending. Here's my second point. Is that righteousness happens God's way, not our way. And this is what he said whenever Elisha told him to do something. In verse 11, it says, but Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out and see me. Here, let me stop there. I thought. You know, the way that we think about God is the most important thing about our lives. And he thought that God was gonna do a certain thing, a certain way. And whenever it didn't happen the way that Naaman thought it was, he left away angry. He thought that God was gonna perform a miracle this way. He thought he was gonna receive his healing. And this is what happened whenever God told him to do something, whenever Elisha instructed him to do something that he didn't wanna do. He was humbled and he was inconvenienced. And so Elisha, whenever he was told to go dip in the river 7 times, he was humbled. Whenever he had to get into the river, what he would have to do is he would have to expose himself. The armor maybe that he was wearing, he would take off the clothes that was covering up his sickness and disease. He had to expose himself, humble himself. He may have looked weak. Maybe all the people around him have seen him as strong, and now he is in a humbled position. And so instead of him wanting to step in to this position of dipping in the river, he became angry because he would have to become humble. And then he was also inconvenienced. This Naaman, he already traveled like 70 miles. He already traveled, and they didn't have cars back then. They had camels, you know what I'm saying? Like they couldn't travel fast. And so he traveled already 70 miles. And whenever he got there, now this river that he had to dip in was another additional 30 miles away. And so now he's inconvenienced because, man, I wanted you to just come out and just do whatever you did and I can go home and I can be cured. But he was humbled and he was inconvenienced. And sometimes the healing that we need so that we can live righteously is not gonna come the way that we think it's gonna come. Sometimes it comes in ways of forgiveness. Maybe it comes through ways of you apologizing. Maybe it comes through ways with you putting up boundaries. Maybe it comes through ways of you receiving prayer. Maybe some of you have come in and you just stand in the back and you observe what God is doing. Maybe it's gonna be you stepping out of your seat and coming to the front and being prayed for. Maybe some of you have questioned God and doubted God and you just look at God and you're angry at him because of your life. Maybe it's gonna be you stepping out of whatever you've done and you step into the thing that God is asking you to do. Sometimes our healing comes and it humbles us, and sometimes it inconveniences us. And Naaman wanted the easy way, but a life that required him to take a step of faith. And I'm gonna let you know that if you wanna actually live a righteous life, that you're gonna need internal healing. And I have another point, but I'm about to end, because I believe that there's gonna be something that happens tonight. I believe that there's gonna be a healing that happens tonight. I believe some of you have never told stuff that you've gone through, that maybe you've been covering up by the way that you live, by the way that you act. Maybe you've been sleeping around, maybe you've been addicted to drugs and alcohol, maybe you've been wanting to get to the best college so that you can prove yourself to your family. And there's nothing against college, but sometimes we will act according to get the approval, and so that we can be viewed the way that we can be, the way of righteousness. But I'm gonna let you know that if you can get internal healing, that you can start stepping in righteous living. That there is a healing that is available for you. And ending with this story, I can remember that time where I was so broken. And in the season, it was like, how am I ever gonna get out of this? How am I ever gonna actually live a life that is worthy of God? I don't wanna fake this anymore. And I can remember it wasn't an overnight change, but it was step by step. And in this scripture, Naaman, he went to the river and he dipped himself 7 times. So he dipped himself once, he wasn't healed. He dipped himself a second time, he didn't receive healing yet. He dipped himself in the river again, and all the way for 7 times, he didn't receive the healing until the 7th time. And then he finally received his healing. And it didn't happen immediately, it didn't happen all at once, but it was step by step, and then he received his healing. And the same was true with my life. It was me being honest with my leaders of how I was feeling. It was me responding to the altar call and actually getting prayer and receiving. It was me stepping after step after step. And after the last time, finally, now I live a life of power. I live a life of joy. I live a life of freedom. I live a life where I can walk confidently. And it didn't all happen at once. It was step by step. And now I don't have to fake righteous living. It was by my internal healing that led to righteous living. And I'm gonna let you know, maybe you've thought, man, I will never actually be able to have healing from that thing that I went through, or I've been in this place, or I've dealt with this stuff, or I've been down and out. You can receive healing. And when you receive healing, you're no longer gonna have to fake it anymore. And this is the last thing I'll say. Righteous living will happen step by step, but it all depends on if we can encounter the presence of God that allows us to do step by step. And there's times where we can make it backwards. Let me prove myself to God. Let me earn his love. No, if you can encounter God, if you can experience his love, if you can experience his joy, if you can experience his power, you no longer want to satisfy the people around you. You will now live this life for Jesus. You will no longer live this life for you. You will live this life for him. And when you encounter the presence of God, you will start to have righteous living. If everybody wants to stand to their feet.